This week on Crossroads Politics, lawmakers push their top priorities closer to the finish line.
Today is the type of day you're just grateful for.
Republican leaders celebrating a deal on property taxes in the House as the Senate rolls out its version of a budget.
I think the first thing needs to be, to try to spend within the revenue you have.
But Democrats say Republicans are celebrating hollow victories.
The way that he framed it is going to tremendously impact schools.
Meanwhile, the Lieutenant Governor, Micah Beckwith, facing questions over his changing choice in transportation.
Recently, the Lieutenant Governor said that he was thinking about trading that high trim level Tahoe for a Cybertruck, and on Twitter, I dared him to do it.
And as top priorities cross the finish line, other issues fall by the wayside.
This is the first barrier in Indiana, and that barrier sits there.
Welcome to Crossroads Politics here on WTHR Plus. I'm Dustin Grove. We've got a lot to get to after a very busy week at the Indiana State House. Just 2 weeks left in this year's legislative session, and lawmakers are making progress on two of their biggest priorities. So let's head to the State House and Emily Longnecker, who was there for some of these big milestones in what has been a months-long fight. Emily?
Yeah, Dustin, it has been very back and forth. Let's first start with talking about property taxes. The House passed an amended version of SB 1 on Thursday. That's the property tax relief bill, and this one has been all over the place. When we first saw this bill, it cut $1 billion in property taxes the first year. Now, that got a lot of pushback from schools and local governments. They told senators they couldn't handle losing that much revenue, so the Senate went back to the drawing board and they limited how much taxes grew instead of cutting them now. But Governor Braun said that that wasn't enough. He threatened to veto or call a special session if he was not happy with the final version of this bill that lawmakers arrived on. So then it was up to the House to arrive at a version that lawmakers voted on Thursday. House Speaker Todd Houston said he's proud of it.
Senator Bray, obviously, there's been a lot of collaboration, a lot of conversations between the House and the Senate and the governor's office. You work to just find that right spot between the three of us. I've been blessed here. We've got great partners on the other side of the building and on the second floor. And today is the type of day you're just grateful for.
Now, this version cuts property taxes by several $100 million in the first year and expands homestead deductions over the next 6 years to keep property taxes down. It also lets small business owners avoid a lot of taxes by raising the ceiling on some exemptions and removing the floor on how much a lot of business property can depreciate. It also makes public schools share their referenda dollars with charter schools in their districts. That's been a Republican priority and something many Democrats have fought hard against. Democrats are also upset about another part of the bill that would let local governments raise income taxes to make up for lost property tax revenues.
Senate Bill 1 will negatively affect those school corporations that we have. This to be clear. It's anything in regards to our homeowners and what we would do for them. In one pocket, there's a tax break. Next pocket, they're taking it out. Zero. $245 in one pocket, probably more than that taken out in the other pocket.
Now, let's be clear, this bill is massive. It is 350 pages long, so it's going to affect millions of Hoosiers in a lot of different ways, but Republicans were able to achieve many priorities in this version. Dustin?
Democrats clearly are unhappy. That's fairly common with the Republican supermajority, but they aren't the only ones here, are they?
No, they're not. We heard from disabled veterans this week that are not happy with this property tax reform bill. And basically they said that it is not in the same spirit of helping disabled veterans as what lawmakers did here in this State House 50 years ago. They feel that they got more help back then with property taxes, but that help has been watered down over the years. They feel a lot because assessed values on homes have gone up, and they don't think that this latest property tax reform bill does much to change that.
Well, we bought this place back in 1996, and we've just been happily married here ever since.
Ron Wilson raised 5 kids in this house in Noblesville.
7 grandkids have climbed the tree in the front yard.
We love it. It's kind of in the country, but we're still in the city.
What Wilson hasn't liked over the years is watching his property taxes go up. He likes even less the proposal from Indiana lawmakers in the House to deal with that.
I looked at the bill, I read it, but it just looks like they're going to destroy the 1975 tax exemption and take that away from us.
By us, Wilson means disabled Hoosier veterans who own homes. He's one of them. Wilson's 100% disabled with hearing loss and other issues after serving in Vietnam in the United States Navy.
I wear hearing aids, but I read lips. If I didn't have these in, I couldn't hear anything.
For the past 50 years, disabled Hoosier veterans like Wilson have received an almost $25,000 deduction off the value of their home. It's part of current Indiana code passed by lawmakers in 1975. Also part of the current code, there's an additional $14,000 deduction in place for totally disabled vets, or ones 62 years and older. The House's current version of SB 1 would eliminate those in 2027.
If our intent as a state is to take care of disabled veterans, in 75, the General Assembly did a much better job.
Retired U.S. Army Brigadier General James Bowerly is also a disabled Hoosier veteran and part of the Military Veterans Coalition of Indiana. He says his phone hasn't stopped ringing with calls from disabled vets regarding SB 1.
I got a phone call at 8 o'clock last night wanting to know what was going on, and there was an expletive in front of that.
In the House's original version of SB 1, the new tax credits are stackable, meaning a disabled Hoosier veteran who's a senior could get up to $600 in tax credits off their bill. Republican State Representative Chris Judy, who himself is a disabled vet, says amendments that passed will make that amount higher. He plans to sit down with veterans groups to hear their concerns.
So I think, sitting down with them again and just having this dialogue of fully explaining what this does and what it doesn't do will help.
Bottom line, says Ron Wilson, from where he sits, the tax deductions in place right now for disabled veterans are better.
Giving us $250, what's that, a case of eggs maybe if we're lucky?
Now, the veterans credits did not end up changing in this version of SB 1, which passed the House this week. And given how hard it has been for lawmakers to get to this point, it's unlikely, Dustin, that they'll revisit that part of the bill.
All right, Emily, stay right there. We're going to come back to you in a minute. I want to get to Nikki Kelly, editor of the Capitol Chronicle. We said the Democrats were unhappy. That may be a bit of an understatement. They had some stronger words for it. I'm looking at House Minority Leader Giaquinta, his comments. He said, this is a tax hike in disguise. But haven't counties always had the option to use the income tax?
Yeah, there are already local income tax options, in fact, up to 3.75% in counties. This actually drops that to 2.9%, so technically the capacity of the local income tax is dropping. The difference is this.
Okay.
If, first of all, they're letting municipalities do it on their own, which is a big deal because in some counties, those county commissioners are just not going to do it.
Yeah, the cities had to get the county to approve it. Yeah, okay.
The second issue is if you're taking away all this revenue, it's basically putting pressure on them to use an income tax that they didn't have before. So while technically, yes, the overall capacity of unused local income taxes dropped from $5 billion to $3 billion, the likelihood that they're more likely to pass an income tax increase is probably higher, and that's what Democrats are focusing on.
Governor Braun has celebrated this bill, but also said he wanted to make sure it matched his priority, especially around not completely eliminating the business property tax. Do you expect any changes before this lands on his desk?
No, he said that yesterday afternoon that he was, but then by last night he was all on board, wants the Senate to concur, everything's great. I would say that was the biggest surprise when House Republicans unveiled this on Friday, was this complete elimination of the business personal property tax. Because all session we've been talking about homeowners, and then suddenly they came out with this massive break for businesses. And so they definitely backed away from that and put a little bit higher of a credit for homeowners. And something that I realize is not going to be something that homeowners see right away, but they are building in some controls that will stop your property tax bill from growing as fast in the future. That's not sexy or anything, but they will help in future bills.
So that would be the reform part of the bill. They talk about cutting and capping and reforming.
Yeah, I mean, they're changing, especially referendums. Referendums have been part of that property tax growth, and that's outside the 1, 2, 3 caps. So they're going to make it, you have to do it in a general election. There are limits on how often you can try, how many you can do back to back. They're also trying to limit debt that communities are taking on, the amount of debt, property tax backed debt, that whether it be for schools or a hotel or a fire station, has really exploded. So they're going to try to limit the growth of that.
So on Friday, Nikki posted an editorial explaining that this is her least favorite part of the session. You mentioned this bill in particular. Why is that?
My point is that for most of the session, I think they do a really great job of hearing bills, listening to Hoosiers, making common sense changes, and being very transparent. And then we get to this end of session period, and they just start throwing stuff everywhere. And that business personal property tax is an example. They put a bunch of stuff all together, like you said, 355 pages. Brand new ideas that we've never seen of. That bill has we're dissolving a school corporation in Southern Indiana. Haven't had a single hearing on that. So that's my idea of toward the end, they get a little loose with what I consider to be a more transparent and accountable system usually.
Well, it's very difficult to follow and keep track of all of that. As hard as you try. You do a great job. All right, Nikki, we'll check back with you in just a minute. Now I want to talk about the other priority this year, the one bill lawmakers are required by law to pass, which is the state budget. And we now know how Senate Republicans think the state's money should be spent over the next 2 years. Let's head back to Emily at the State House. This version, Emily, has a few key differences from the budget proposed over in the House, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Differences in how they deal with some of the education spending, specifically school vouchers. On the Senate side, it's the Appropriations Committee that comes up with the Senate's budget proposal for the next 2 years. And the chairman of that committee, Republican State Senator Ryan Mishler, said that this budget proposal is about efficiency, oversight, and transparency.
The two biggest areas of spending, education and Medicaid. Funding for K-12 education makes up nearly half of the Senate's proposed budget, coming in at close to $19 billion over the next 2 years. Unlike the House's budget proposal, which funds school vouchers at 100%, the Senate's plan doesn't go that far.
And it's not, that we don't want to do the vouchers, it's just how do we pay for them? I think that's going to be the difference, is just how do we fund that?
The decision not to fund school vouchers at 100% was a move even some Senate Democrats agreed with, especially without knowing yet what will be in next week's revenue forecast. That forecast tells lawmakers how much money the state should spend next year, which could clash with the budget.
We're going to that revenue forecast. I don't believe the dollars are there, and I think public schools, we have to continue to do with public schools without taking from them.
Medicaid is the second biggest area of spending in the budget at $10 billion. That's an amount Senator Ryan Mishler says has doubled in just 4 years, cutting into what the state spends on education.
So that's what it eats into first. So if we don't do something different and get our hands around it now, it's gonna cause trouble for K-12.
Republicans in the Senate have made addressing Medicaid growth a top priority this session by trying to cut down on the number of Hoosiers on it with changes to who can qualify for Medicaid. Republicans say it's about making sure Hoosiers who need help the most can still get it. Democrats disagree, saying thousands on Medicaid right now will end up on wait lists.
The budget does not address the Medicaid wait lists. We have more than 10,000 Hoosiers on a program that they have to wait until probably next budget session, if not longer than that.
Even with money tight and revenues expected to be smaller than in years past, the Senate's version of the budget holds more money back for reserves than the version of the budget in the House.
If we have any trouble, if we have a pretty decent reserve in year 2, we've got some room to maneuver there.
There's also a transparency piece in the Senate's budget proposal. It would require elected officials, including the governor and lieutenant governor, to fill out travel reports that would talk about, if they took a trip, where they went, why they went there, and who paid for it. This is, of course, just the Senate's version. Expect a lot of discussion in the next couple weeks between the House and Senate lawmakers in both chambers to arrive at that final budget. Dustin?
All right, Emily. Nikki thought it was interesting that they backed off the universal vouchers. This is something that Republicans really touted as a priority. Do you think that that's going to be a sticking point as it moves over to the other side this week?
I think it will be. I think it's mostly probably mostly a negotiating tactic.
Okay.
Senator Mishler has actually had some issues with, not issues, he's concerned about the accountability in the voucher program, and he's mentioned that before. So, you know, it is about $80 million of new money to go universal, and so maybe he wanted to leave some negotiating room depending on how the forecast goes. That's an easy thing they could give if there's something they want more in another part of the budget.
And speaking of the forecast, we have the April revenue forecast coming. Overall forecast for the U.S. economy, a lot gloomier, right, than what we saw at the start of the session. If things changed in a major way, is that something lawmakers, do you think, will have to deal with it or try to deal with in the next 2 weeks?
Yeah, and part of the forecast starts with an economic forecast by a national economic forecasting group, and then they'll look into where we're at in the nation, and then there's a technical group who sort of puts that in terms of revenue for the state. So I expect we'll hear a lot about tariffs next week, and we'll see if it's gonna cost the state budget.
Okay, tariffs changing every day, seems, by the hour. More to come on that. Also, more to come here on Crossroads Politics. An update from our 13 Investigates team. The governor just signed a new law tied to one of their stories. We're going to talk about this test strips law. We've talked about this several times here on Crossroads Politics. This new law makes it clear it is legal to possess and to use those test strips and field kits that detect fentanyl and other deadly substances. The problem has been that there's a lot of confusion about whether those strips are actually legal in Indiana. 13 Investigates reporter Sierra Putman showed how some law enforcement and prosecutors thought the tests were illegal drug paraphernalia, even though many counties and hospitals were handing them out freely. Well, this bill clears up that confusion. It takes effect on July 1. Still ahead here on Crossroads Politics, the fight to attract living organ donors.
When they make that decision to live, to give of theirself, it is the ultimate gift of life.
Why a push to protect those donors ultimately fell short. But first, should your insurance get to decide what treatment your doctors give you? Lawmakers tackle prior authorization next. It was clear this week that lawmakers could feel the clock ticking. Just about 2 weeks to go to finish up this year's session. And Emily, healthcare costs were a top concern.
Yeah, we've seen that in several bills dealing with healthcare costs this session, Dustin. One dealt this week with prior authorization for medical procedure. This was a make or break week for bills to be heard in committee. Thursday was the deadline for bills to be heard in committees in both the House and the Senate if they had any hope of getting over the finish line. If a bill did not get called this week in committee, it's considered dead in the water.
It's a busy week at the Indiana State House with the final week of committee hearings. This week, lawmakers on the House Insurance Committee unanimously passed SB 480 out of committee after it was amended. The bill sought to restrict prior authorization requirements from insurance companies. It passed out of the Senate by an overwhelming majority. An amendment to the bill dealt with doctors performing a procedure on a patient and discovering another procedure is also needed at the same time. Under the amendment, doctors would have to give an insurance company a reason why they felt that procedure was necessary. Another part of the amendment requires insurance companies reviewing a request for a procedure to use a doctor reviewing that request who has the same level of expertise as the doctor making the request.
And again, lawmakers in the House Insurance Committee passed this bill out of committee unanimously. Dustin?
Emily, thank you. Nikki, this issue has been one that lawmakers have tried and failed to address in the past. It's made it out of one house. Do you think it'll make it through the next?
I think some version of it will make it through. The struggle with this issue is prior authorization is absolutely annoying for consumers, for doctors, but the irony is that it likely saves money because, you know, sometimes the insurance companies are blocking much more expensive things, or they're at least making doctors think about it, consider other options first. So that one's a tough one on that.
Okay.
But some version will get out.
So if you rewind to the beginning of this session, there was a list of healthcare reform bills. Yes. One of them was one that would basically call on hospitals to cut the cut spending, right, or lower costs to consumers.
Yeah, it was focusing on nonprofit hospitals, which most of the systems here in Indiana are nonprofit, and they're higher than usual costs. And so they were trying to kind of ding them if they went over a certain level, possibly take away their nonprofit status. Yesterday in the Senate Appropriations Committee, they passed an amendment that would require nonprofit hospitals to freeze their prices for 2 years, no matter what, just freeze them, while they study what is an acceptable middle range cost and then set up sort of penalties if they go above or beyond them. The problem is we have competing hospital studies, hospital price studies, and they're both sort of from each entity, and so they want some sort of independent analysis in the period of this 2 years where there's a freeze.
Okay, how realistic would that be, you think? 2-year freeze.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty big. There was one Republican, Senator Liz Brown, who said, I can't believe we're sitting here talking about freezing. She said, you know, what if another pandemic happened? Or what if with the tariffs that we're talking about, what if their prices go massively up and we lock them into a 2-year freeze? It's pretty big for, you know, Republicans who are usually sort of small government marketplace guys.
Well, I know that they've been feeling the heat from lobbying groups for consumers saying something's got to be done about prices.
Exactly.
Okay. All right, Nikki, thank you. This week, a state lawmaker is calling for the lieutenant governor to trade in a top-of-the-line SUV bought with state money for what he calls a more reasonably priced vehicle for the office of lieutenant governor. That kind of purchase, what was purchased recently, would be illegal under new legislation signed into law this month. Our Rich Nye talked with the state representative who recently has gotten into a social media back and forth with Lieutenant Governor Micah Beckwith over his government ride. Take a look.
The Senate will come to order.
Micah Beckwith presides over the state Senate as lieutenant governor. He was at the podium Tuesday afternoon, and I was told therefore unavailable for comment on the cost of his state-purchased vehicle. Beckwith is traveling Indiana in a top-of-the-line Chevy Tahoe High Country like this. State records show the SUV was bought in February for almost $88,000. State Representative Mitch Gore-sponsored legislation passed this session that says state offices can only buy standard model vehicles and no vehicles from a luxury brand.
It just says that if you get a Tahoe, it can't be the highest trim level like he got, right? And you can get a Tahoe, but you can't get an Escalade, is also what my bill says, or you can't get a Yukon Denali like the Secretary of State has. It just says be reasonable.
But the law does not take effect until July 1st. The Office of Secretary of State Diego Morales bought a $90,000 GMC Yukon Denali last summer.
Representative Gore says that under his legislation, a state agency purchasing a vehicle like the one the Beckwith office is using will be illegal.
It was so expensive, he could trade it in at a slight loss, buy a brand new base model, and the state would still come out ahead. So that's what he and the Secretary should do. They should return these cars, get a reasonable one, return some money to state coffers.
Gore and Beckwith are trading barbs on social media.
Recently, the lieutenant governor said that he was thinking about trading that high trim level Tahoe for a Cybertruck, and on Twitter, I dared him to do it.
Beckwith parked this Tesla Cybertruck in his parking spot Monday. His office provided this statement. The lieutenant governor wants to show President Trump and Elon Musk that Hoosiers support everything they're doing. At the State House, Rich Nye, 13 News.
Okay. What is the deal with the Cybertruck? I know the Capitol Chronicle's been looking into that this week.
Well, yeah, I mean, they've refused to essentially say whether they bought it or not, but it was gone the next day. So it was clearly part of a, you know, they wanted to troll the people who are calling him out for, you know, this spending. So, yeah.
And again, to be clear, this is not about whether a lieutenant governor or a governor or whoever it is should have a Tahoe, right? Because a lot of government officials drive these SUVs. It's about the top of the line trim version.
And I mean, do you really need something that can have 3 rows? You know, I mean, the just question is, remember that these are taxpayer dollars, and you know, you might not need the top of the line to go to your Lincoln Day dinner or you know, visit. You know, a local business for an event. And so I think it's fair. You know, I've tried to tell people I have a great Ford Escape, easily 4 people very comfortably, 5 a little tight, but I don't think they're gonna do it.
I've never seen a lieutenant governor or a secretary of state driving around in a Focus.
Not a Focus, that's small.
Okay. All right, Nikki, thank you. Still ahead on Crossroads Politics.
But you got to be your own advocate. You got to tell your story.
Why a bill to encourage living organ donation didn't make it through the legislative session. This was the last week for bills to make it through committees in the State House. Many of them did not make it. Even some, Emily, that had bipartisan support over in the Senate.
Yeah, Dustin, we saw that with Senate Bill 111. It deals with living organ donors getting insurance. Now, it had bipartisan support, as you said, in the Senate. It passed out of that chamber easily, but it never made it to the House floor for a vote because it didn't get called in committee. It was assigned to the House's Insurance Committee, and the chairman of that committee did not call it for a hearing. We talked to one man about SB 111. He knows the importance of organ donation because he's lived through the experience.
Every day that I wake up, I am grateful to a higher power.
When 62-year-old Danny Ernstis says he never takes a single day for granted, it's not a cliche. He really means it. That's because just 3 years ago, Danny was in stage 5 kidney failure, staring at death if he didn't get a kidney transplant.
For me to stay alive, I had to do dialysis 7 days a week, 8 hours a day. You hook up to a machine and that's your life.
Danny joined more than 120,000 Americans already on the transplant waiting list. 100,000 of them also needed a kidney. Danny knew it could be a long wait.
There is no kidney sitting on a shelf. There is no heart, no lung, no liver. You're at the mercy of a fellow human being saying yes.
The Shelby County native had no idea where that yes would come from, or if it would come at all. In one case, he could get a kidney from someone who passed away and gave the okay to donate their organs. In another scenario, Danny could match with someone called a living donor, a person willing to donate one of their healthy kidneys to Danny and go on living with just one kidney themselves.
I was always searching for a donor.
That search took Danny to Facebook, where he told his story.
This is me. This is what it's like to be on here. This is what it means to be, I'm dying. These are my grandkids. This is my life. This is who I am. You got to be your own advocate. You got to tell your story.
By September 2023, Danny knew 20 people had undergone testing to see if they were a match to donate to him. For 19 of those willing, the answer was no.
I had resolved that either I had to expand my search or I would live the rest of my life out on dialysis and die.
Then a Facebook message and a phone call from an old high school classmate now living in Minnesota. A moment that changed everything.
I'm like, man, I have not talked to you in 43 years. He goes, I've been testing since September. And he goes, I found out in January I'm healthy enough and I'm a match to you. I want to give you my kidney and I want to save your life.
2 months later, Tom Giordano, a guy Danny once played football and rode the school bus with, gave Danny a second chance.
I can never put words to that, what that meant for somebody that saved my life. For Tom, the gift that he's gave me.
But this grandfather of 3 found those words.
Just know there's somebody behind a living donor.
Danny told his story this legislative session at the Indiana State House in support of Senate Bill 111, a bill to prohibit companies from denying life, disability, or long-term care insurance to someone who's a living organ donor. 35 states already have laws protecting living organ donors from insurance discrimination.
When they make that decision to live, to give of theirself, it is the ultimate gift of life.
Senate Bill 111 overwhelmingly passed in the Senate in late January with bipartisan support. But on this session's final week for bills to be heard in committee, SB 111 didn't get a hearing. Similar bills have met the same fate in past sessions. All of them championed by the late Democratic State Senator Gene Breaux, who passed away last year from complications due to chronic kidney disease.
Well, Senator Breaux was a wonderful champion for this bill.
Policy advocates like John Hoffman with the American Kidney Fund had hoped this session would be different, in part to honor the legacy of Breaux's work on the issue. Hoffman says living organ donors in Indiana have faced insurance discrimination.
We have identified individual patients in Indiana last year who experienced that exact situation.
But that's not what the chairman of the House Insurance Company says he found.
It's just not an issue for these companies. Companies are not denying people based on organ donation. So I struggle with passing a bill that is not needed.
Republican State Representative Martin Carbaugh says he works in life insurance and has checked in with companies every time a bill like SB 111 has come up.
Is there a company or two potentially out there that looks at that as a risk factor they don't want to take for their book of business? I can't say that I've talked to every company that exists, but as a whole, there are lots of companies that would help any of these folks who are willing to donate an organ.
It removes another barrier.
Danny Ernstis says it's about making living organ donation as uncomplicated a choice as possible for the person considering it.
And this is the first barrier in Indiana, and that barrier sits there.
Just like the thousands of Hoosiers themselves sitting, waiting for an organ donor. Danny knows what that wait is like.
You sit and wait, and the clock's ticking.
For Danny, though, who gets more time with his wife and family, that part of the wait is over.
We get to grow old together, and my 3 kids, and I got 3 grandsons, so I get to be papa, dad, husband. I got a new lease on life.
But the wait to see legislation like SB 111 become law continues.
And Danny emailed me this week to express his disappointment that this bill did not get a hearing in committee. He says he's going to continue his work advocating for the importance of organ donation. He knows firsthand that there are people waiting right now. He knows what that wait is like and what it's like to wait for someone to say yes to helping save your life. Dustin?
Man, what a powerful story, Emily. Thank you. Nikki, this happens every session with a bill that, gets bipartisan support in one chamber, doesn't make it out of the next in the other chamber. Are you aware of any other bills that
Yeah, there were a
suffered the
few
same
big
fate?
ones that died yesterday. One was Senate Bill 11, which would have restricted youth from having Facebook or social media accounts without parental permission. It passed the Senate in like the first 2 weeks and just died. There were some constitutional concerns, so that is not going to pop back up anywhere. Another big one from the House was a immigration bill that was being pushed by Attorney General Todd Rokita, and it had a section that really kind of came down on businesses that hired illegal workers. So that did not get a hearing in the Senate. Senator Liz Brown specifically is the chair of Judiciary, and she just had a lot of issues with the bill, so she didn't hear it.
All right, much more to come on what will be a busy week ahead. Nikki Kelly with the Capitol Chronicle, thank you so much for joining us this week again. And that does it for this week's episode of Crossroads Politics. We'll be back here every Sunday for the rest of the legislative session at 10 a.m. here on WTHR+. For Emily Longnecker and Nikki Kelly, I'm Dustin Grove. Thanks so much for watching. We hope to see you next time.